Hey, all you beautiful ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what the heck's wrong with you? It's free. Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplace can change our world, as we get started, drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat. Your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And if you're not comfortable dropping your LinkedIn URL in the chat, you should be because you're in a safe space. But if you're still not, just drop in where you are calling from. All right. We have been breaking records left and right on the Ethicsverse. We're going to be peaking towards that 1,000 people attendees each week, 1,000 ethic cuties. Can you imagine every Thursday? It's crazy. We got a real treat for you today. We're going to be talking about sustainability in a new era, challenges and tips with the one and only Doug Heilman. He is a friend of the show, friend of the family, super smart guy with a lot of great perspective. So we're going to be diving in as we run through our announcements. We added something to the console so you can check out some of the thought leadership that's out there. I really encourage you to do that. You got to keep feeding your mind if you're not going, or if you're going to really make the impact that is available to us. So download a book or check out some of these books. There's a lot of great ones on there, a lot of great podcasts. Go ahead and check this out. And speaking of great books, we are giving out 5 today of The Art of Ideation for culture building. Sorry, pardon me. Hema and Ashley wrote this book. If you don't have this book, win one today with your comments in the chat. And if you don't feel like dropping comments in the chat, go ahead and pick this up. This is going to be money well spent. We're going to have a ton of great ideas in here on how you can build this culture of integrity that really helps us drive ethics to the core of business. You get a lot more participation in our program. I also want to share with you a really great clip from the ethics experts.
It may take you decades to build up a reputation for integrity and honor, and one bad act can destroy it, and you may never get it back. And so you can spend your whole career trying to be a person with integrity and ethics, and one mistake can just bring you down. And so you have to be careful that everything you do is, in fact, ethical, and that it is something that you should do as a matter of integrity. And so the way I do it as a leader with my team, we talk about it at team meetings. They know that that's the expectation. If there is any question that something is appropriate or ethical, we talk about it, and then we make sure that the law supports us, and if not, we find out what we can do and what we can't do. The team knows that if they make a promise or they make a representation to the court, to our opponent, to the client, it needs to be 100%, or at least as 100% as they know it at the time. There are very few things that will get me upset at my team. I like them that much, but acting without integrity or honor would be one of them, and they know that.
So if you have not checked that episode out, definitely go ahead and do that. Episode 212 just dropped with Margaret. Another great episode that you should listen to when you're walking your dog, or you're doing your dishes, or you're cleaning, or you're just hanging out. We got to keep feeding the mind. And the Ethics Experts Top 2% Global Podcast, thank you very much. Fastest growing business ethics podcast in the world, which is amazing. And it's not because I'm so smart. It's because we get great guests on, and they really share a lot of great insights. So if you want to help out the show, hit 5 stars. That really helps to push this forward and wind up on more people's radar. Speaking of pushing it forward, we next Thursday, circle your calendar, book a little bit of your PTO. We are going to be doing a full day workshop. It's not a full day, it's 3 hours. A full workshop on this concept of return on integrity. At Compliance Week, we just kind of scratched the surface on it. So we're going to be talking about the concept. We're going to be talking about some persuasion, and then we're going to have an entire session just doing a bunch of calculations, giving you a bunch of different places to look to start to build this ROI case, right? We need to connect to the strategy of the business, and we need to show up like business people. Well, guess what? Everybody else, all these other departments that seem to get the resources that they need, they speak this secret language of ROI. So me and Andy McBride are going to be diving into that. Andy McBride, if you don't know him, welcome to Earth. He was over Compliance Program of the Year last year. Super smart guy. I've learned so much from him. So you got to join us on next Thursday, okay? So it's going to be a special kind of, let's call it the Ethicsverse MBA. Each week I name it. I haven't set a lot of name for this yet. So Ethicsverse MBA next Thursday, 3-hour session, up to 9 CEUs for SHRM, for CCB, and for HRCI. Real quick, I want to show you this cool new innovation on our platform, which people seem to be loving. Check out our G2 reviews, but look at this cool thing.
Okay, case closed. Ugh, now what? Ugh, it's always the same.
The end of an investigation doesn't mean the end of an issue. corrective action plans go beyond investigations and into the workplace. Users can fill out corrective action plans themselves or assign them to other users. Access pre-built, optimized templates for any situation, or create your own. Set deadlines, notify assignees, and create tangible, measurable outcomes for your workplace. Progress is tracked in real time, giving visibility to all of your stakeholders. Ethico's corrective action plans, available now.
So as we always say, the end of an investigation is not the end of something, it's the start of something. And this corrective action plan library allows you to attach essentially a checklist on the back end of any investigation. And you can have a whole library for, different types of substantiated issues, discrimination, harassment, any of the kind of things that need to be followed up on in a consistent way in order to not only maintain an effective program, but also be able to prove the effectiveness. It integrates with our Eco reports, which is our super flexible reporting tool. So you can really get some good visibility on how effective your program is. If you're questioning effectiveness, how much better is it to be able to see a graph that shows, wow, 90% of my substantiated or closed cases have a correction action plan that has been completed. So we need to pull the future forward. That's what we're trying to do at Ethico. And thank you all who have contributed to the advancement of our tool. We want to make this tool We want to make our ethics and compliance platform something that can create leverage for you inside your organization. And so if you feel like the love is lost, if you feel like your old tool hasn't been updated in a long time, it hasn't, you should check out what's going on over at Ethico. You get up to a year free. That can do a lot to ease the pain of the transition, give you some of that budget certainty, and get yourself, we got to solve for outcome. You got to get yourself the tools you need to do your job in the best way possible. All right. With all that, let's get one massive emoji explosion. We're already up to 1,000 for the one and only Doug Heilman. Doug runs Heilman Consulting. And let me get your intro here, Doug. Doug runs Heilman Consulting. He's the president and founder, and it's a firm specializing in environmental health and governance challenges. He has over 40 years experience across diverse sectors, including automotive, energy, pharmaceuticals, utilities, and he helps clients navigate complex environmental, social, and governance compliance requirements, reducing operational risk, and improving non-financial reporting. How's it going, Doug? Look how good me and Doug look today, by the way. Okay? I'm not talking about in real life. I'm talking about our avatars. All right.
I'd like to know who that handsome guy is on the right. He looks like somebody I could be related to, but I love I wish AI could do that for me in person, walking around the street all the time.
Well, if I blur my eyes enough, Doug, you do kind of look like that guy. All right. So, Doug, why don't you dive in and kind of tell us what we're going to be talking about today? Okay.
And before I do, Nick, I really want to express my appreciation for Ethico and for being here today. It's such a privilege. What Ethico is doing is really changing the space, and what you just covered with the corrective action plans, I think as coming into this as an engineer auditor, I think that's a piece that's often overlooked. And I like the way you said, focus on the outcome, not the activity. That's tough to do, but you guys are chasing that. And you just said something. I'm taking notes while I'm listening to you to pull the future forward. Every Thursday, Nick says something that just really sticks. And if you're quick enough to catch it,
just one thing. And just kidding.
Some things. At Compliance Week, it did a great job. I love the saying, "Are you the bumper sticker on the car or the headlights showing the way?" I mean, all these little platitudes, and Nick just throws them off. So, to be in the company of Hema and Ellen and Andrew and other guests on this program, Matt Kelly, it's a real privilege. And what Ethico is doing to establish a community among compliance professionals is sorely needed. We saw that at Compliance Week the other week, and this Thursday Rumble, as I call it, is really worthwhile, and it's a privilege to be here.
Well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for all those kind words. All kidding aside, it means a lot coming from you because you go to a lot of different conferences and you have so many great insights. So really appreciate that. So what are we going to be talking about today?
I, as a sustainability specialist working with a lot of functions, I have to say that I'm accustomed to hurling a lot of content into sessions, and Ethico is famously conversational and kind of open engagement, which I think is really the ticket to the success for these Thursday events. So I have a lot of content here that's available on my website. We'll talk to a couple of slides maybe as the audience steers us. But my recent claim to fame, one of them is as the author of a COSO document that is really catching on mapping sustainability reporting to the internal controls framework. And I find that for a lot of people, that's kind of new. And it's worth setting the stage for that. For this group, I'd be interested to know, perhaps you can put in the chat, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being heavily involved, 1 being only when I'm into it, dragged into it, kicking and screaming. What is the level of your involvement on sustainability reporting at your organization from 1 to 5? 5 being like, yeah, I swim in it every day. 1 is I'm only in it when I'm drag kicking and screaming. So what are we getting on responses? What's the range?
We got a 3 from Jason. We got some 1s. We got a 4 from Trace. So it's a little bit all over the place. We're getting some 1s from some other folks. As usual, Frank, keep feeding us ideas. You will continue to puppeteer this conversation from behind the scenes.
So
it looks like, with quick math, it looks like it's about a little bit under a 2.5.
Okay. Now let's see here. I'm going to push.
Sherry says an 8. So Sherry made her own. She made her own scale. So
Sherry is my co-presenter for the next session.
Aha. All right.
So COSO is, I would say, the most important organization that almost nobody's heard of. A couple financial collapses ago with the Lincoln savings and loan industry, the accounting industry looked around and so did the regulators and say, well, what does a well-run organization look like? And there really was no framework. So the AICPA, who you've heard of, Institute of Internal Auditors, Institute of Management Accountants, a professional association for the CFOs of the world, got together and created a framework, a principles-based framework called the Internal Controls Framework on what does a well-run organization look like. Fast forward a few years, and Enron and WorldCom led to another collapse, and Congress passed Sarbanes-Oxley. Tucked into the bill was a requirement that companies establish internal controls over financial reporting, and that is subject to SOX testing and part of the financial auditor opinion. Well, what do internal controls look like? The law didn't define it. There was this COSO thing out there. So COSO began as voluntary, and it migrated into mandatory. It's now essentially a statutory requirement for how companies design and implement controls over financial reporting. That's going on 20 years, and along comes sustainability reporting, which began as a voluntary kind of marketing-oriented thing. It's migrated towards something that is now required by law in some jurisdictions. It's used by analysts and investors. And the COSO board wondered, why are people not using our framework for sustainability reporting? And the answer is, well, they didn't know they could, or they didn't know how. So the COSO board sponsored an effort to map their topic neutral internal controls framework to sustainability reporting. The cover of it's on the screen. I have my own autographed copy right here. That was released 2 years ago, and I am an author of this document with 5 CPAs, a former chair of the financial FASB. That was a year of my life.
Wow.
And my role on this was a couple things. This document is designed to bridge the gap between people who know internal controls and talk that language of the suits, as I call it. That's accounting and finance, the people who are involved in financial reporting, and those who don't know internal controls, at least by that name. That includes HR, environmental, operations, real estate. You know, all the people who provide the data and information that go into sustainability reports. Those two cohorts really have not been able to talk to each other. And that is so important when it comes to producing sustainability information, especially if it's released publicly, especially if it goes into an SEC filing, especially if it goes to financial analysts. It's got to be right. And so this document, it's free. There's a download available on my website. All the slides that you see here on my website for future reference. So this is kind of the long winding story of COSO. Since this was published, it was released the first week to over 500,000 viewers worldwide through all the big four and the professional associations. And I have it on pretty good authority that as the big four and accounting firms are preparing their methodologies to do assurance on sustainability reporting, they're leveraging this to come up with their assurance protocols. So
if I can jump in real quick,
yeah,
there's a couple of great comments that I think can help really frame out this conversation. So
good.
Some people are saying that they're a 5. Some people are saying that they're a 1. Michelle said, 1, only because I'm not in the room for those conversations, but if I was, it would be a 5. And then the one and only Frank said, I'll tell you what, my world of sustainability is not so much ESG based, which I certainly want to learn more about from others. But my sustainability world with respect to, quote, compliance sustainability has to do with the following 3. 1, regulatory environment. 2, internal changes. 3, emerging risks with special recent focus on new tech. So for him, that's a solid 5. And I think that's the right framework. So what I think is important about, so whether you're a 1 or a 5, the principles we're going to be talking about today, I think are readily transferable to any place on that spectrum. We in compliance, we have obligations. We put these controls in place. And if we can monitor these controls, we can raise the level of assurance we have that we're de-risking the organization and focusing our efforts in the right spots. So if you're not a sustainability pro and that's not in your title, stick around because everything we're going to be talking about, I think, is readily transferable. We're really talking about one thing at the end of the day. We're talking about making our businesses more excellent. We're trying to increase the level of quality of our organizations vis-a-vis de-risking the company. And sustainability is just one facet of the shape.
You know, early on when you talked about a few minutes ago, Nick, about adding value, I mean, it's been a couple of decades now since the total market cap on publicly traded companies used to consist the value of plant property and equipment. Right. And it's been a while since the total value of a company market cap is non-financial, it's non-physical, it's reputation, it's goodwill.
Yeah, it's goodwill.
And like the clip that you played before on the ethical lapses, you know, so much of what you do around this non-financial area is demanded by stakeholders in the terms of reporting. And what you put out there contributes to that intangible market cap, which is why it's so important to get it right, and how it's so important to harness and leverage platforms like Ethico and to just make the most of it. And to your point, if you're not in the room, you know, my goal on all of these things is to empower and to motivate and to build confidence that you should be in that room and you should be asking the questions and contributing. Compliance, in one of my sessions here, I think even the materials, I have a cover slide that says compliance creeps in on little cat feet, with apologies to Robert Frost, that we get the legal and regulatory, everybody follows the law firms, the Federal Register, but it comes in a lot of other ways too. These voluntary frameworks like Responsible Business Alliance is one that began as voluntary, looking at risk for human trafficking, let's say, and illicit practices in the supply chain. Well, now it's part of accounting standards. One of the disclosure standards is, does your company participate in Responsible Business Alliance, and do you follow up on findings from those audits? Well, something that started out CDP, formerly Carbon Disclosure Project, will likely be the disclosure portal for California laws and regulations. So things that were voluntary are kind of a hint at what's coming, and I suggest that you consider those essentially as compliance. And another one, what is really eating everybody's lunch is B2B reporting. It's common to look at the publicly disclosed sustainability reports and do that. So much is going up and down the value chain. And I see so much of companies getting questionnaires from their customers about things that are not publicly reported. And the customers are imposing requirements in their vendor contracts. And once you commit to doing something with the customer, in my book, that's compliance. Because 100%. I have seen companies remove vendors from their supply chain because they have not come through on commitments to sustainability they made in their contracts. That's compliance. And
good point.
The funny thing is that those requirements will find their way in to the sales team, and it doesn't make it to compliance. It doesn't make it into the register. So if you're a compliance professional, just go snooping around. It's everywhere.
So that leads to another great question from Michelle. Michelle, nice job with these questions today. Michelle said, leadership has to open the door. You think that's true? Is that not true? How do you get that door opened when leadership hasn't made that connection that like, oh, wow, this is just, this is compliance. And I have this smart person who cares over here who can do a lot to de-risk the organization with respect to these external commitments that we've made.
How do you make somebody else do anything? Well, you can't. You have to make them want to do it. You have to, to use the old trope, to build a business case. I think it's all about risk and it's all about opportunity, that when you're talking to business leaders and you feel like you should be involved, paint the picture that makes them want you to be involved. I have on the slide here now something that's in the COSO book. And so much of what is leaving the company for sustainability reporting, it really differs from financial reporting. As kind of a sidebar, ESG has kind of taken on a bad connotation as being all woke and something we can't do anymore. I have a different view of ESG. I regard ESG as really kind of just a taxonomy. Companies have been doing financial reporting for 100 years or maybe as long as there's been money. So the accountants know how to categorize income, liabilities, sales expenses. There's a whole ledger system for that. When it comes to non-financial things, what do you do with nature resources, scope 3 emissions, there's no way to organize it. ESG is a taxonomy, and we have to figure out, we collectively, which of those topics apply to our organization, which present risk, which presents opportunity. And the funny thing about this reporting is that investors have really driven the bus, but a broad array of stakeholders are demanding information and reporting on stuff that companies kind of don't have yet. So if there's a demand for this information and you're not doing it, you're exposed. And this reporting, compared to financial reporting that a lot of the suits, as I say, are familiar with, sustainability reporting is kind of different. Financial reporting, we know what our sales are. It's within the four corners of our company. We can control that. So much of sustainability reporting involves business partners, supply chain, things that you don't control. So how do you put a control around something you don't control? It's just a little funny. Much of sustainability reporting is narrative. In financial reporting, we think, what are the numbers? What's the earnings per share? Sustainability reporting, there'll be a topic, please describe your risk assessment process for human capital for yourself and key business partners. It's not a number. What's the control for that? And many things in sustainability reports are kind of forward-looking. What are your targets on water use? What is your targets for climate change or de-risking your company on climate change? When you describe things that you intend to do, it sets up the expectation that you report in the next cycle on what did you do about that. That touches all parts of the organization. I think, I've done a lot of work in internal audit. They're kind of after the fact to see, did you do what you said you were going to do? Compliance touches all parts of the organization, and it can be a very powerful place to see what have we committed to do. Do we have governance structures? Do we have resources? How are we preparing ourselves to succeed according to our own expectations? And by the way, CEO, management, upper, you've signed on to these expectations. Would you like to meet those expectations? We can make sure you meet those expectations. We're your ally here.
That's a great frame. And I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. It's a framing exercise. It's not a number on the page, to your point. It's a story, you know what I'm saying? And that allows for us to really build that pathos muscle in our rhetorical exercise that is picking that lock and getting into that kind of a conversation. Listen, you can look at your annual report. You can find out what your OKRs are for the organization. These are the goals of your company. There's always a way to connect into those goals and frame out what you're trying to do or what your department is doing in support of those goals. And when we can start to build that muscle and build that habit, it really unlocks a lot. It unlocks a lot of attention, access, and ultimately the resources we need in order to get the things we got to get to do our job.
There's the materials available. Someone mentioned that different compliance, the 3 channels of compliance. Here's a graphic you can take and use, modify, do whatever you want. It shows kind of a company and organizations in the middle, and the upstream and the downstream are talking to each other, and they're talking to influences. And my tagline here is, if you feel like you're getting beat up on compliance requirements and reporting requirements for sustainability from all sides, it's because you are getting beat up from all sides. And a lot of these stakeholder groups are talking to each other, coming up with what they want to hear from you. And I think another way compliance can really be helpful is to monitor those emerging issues and monitor those discussions and see like what's coming. Many folks on this call will be familiar. In my view, in sustainability, there's climate and there's everything else. You know, the SEC had a climate rule that's now pulled back, but there's a global climate rule. California has a climate rule. There's a voluntary framework, and they're all pretty much the same. So I think it's going to be hard to get away from not doing anything about climate. Well, the next couple things in the queue are human capital and nature resources. So I think on those 2 things, it's, if you look at kind of what's going on around the circle here, maybe it hasn't hit you yet. But if you're in a food processing company, nature resources are going to hit you. If you hire people or depend upon people, human capital is going to hit you. Or if you have a supply chain that's labor intensive, human capital is going to hit you. So if it's not compliance yet, it might be compliance soon. And one of my observations, Nick, and viewers over the years, is that when a compliance requirement hits, what you have to do to fulfill the requirement, the longer you kick the can down the road, the more you're going to be flailing and floundering and scrambling to do stuff in less time than you have to do it. You know, well, so just pay attention to this stuff, be in the conversation.
Yeah, to that point, this is not like a new thing, right? It comes up as like a suggestion, and then it's a requirement. There's a bunch of quote unquote case law to show this pattern. And so again, if we're going to be the headlights on the car, as Doug was saying, our job is to help see around the curve or see deeper into the darkness. So they're the same underlying principles, right? The same underlying principles, undergird or sort of like are foundational to these different regulations that might be suggestions right now. It's our job to aggregate that and boil that down to like what we need to be doing to get out ahead of it. Because to your point, if we just wait until it's an actual requirement, it's not like our to-do list can go on pause. You know what I'm saying? We have to carve out that time in our day to push our program forward and help our organization truly de-risk and be more, anti-fragile. Because there's a lot of fragility that can come from living in this like reactionary mode. So what can we do to like reorganize our day and our time to avoid that kind of situation where, we're not nearly as impactful as we could otherwise be?
We had a question on the relationship. Here's standards, frameworks, references for your use again in the materials that you can say, well, which of these apply to ourselves? And somebody had the question about the relationship between compliance function, I would say, and internal audit on this topic. Can that be a way in? How much should they be talking to internal audit? It's an intriguing avenue. In my view, it may depend upon the power that internal audit and the culture of internal audit at your organization. Structurally, absolutely, it should work. In my experience, there are internal audit organizations that are very comfortable in doing assurance engagements only. Is the expectation very clear? Can we come up with a checklist or a protocol where we can tick all the boxes and we just stay in our lane and give those reports? Are we in, out, or what are the findings, and take that to the board? There are other internal audit groups that have gotten a little further on really being an ally and a champion to the business, and they're more trusted advisor is the word they love to use, and management and the board will come to them for advisory engagements. Hey, internal audit, you know the organization. Here's a number of standards and frameworks. We kind of think in compliance that we should, up our game in some of these things and pay more attention to few, but you're the authority, maybe, and you have the ear of the board because internal audit is chartered by the board. They report to the board, not to management. So maybe you could help us out here by doing an advisory engagement, scan the landscape and say, how are we doing in managing the risks that arise from reporting, meeting the needs of our stakeholders, on track to meet new obligations that we see coming out, like reporting to in the EU if you're connected to that. So they can absolutely be a champion. I think it's company dependent upon how internal audit is regarded in your organization.
All right, so let's talk about some of the sustainability reporting and some of these suggested takeaways. And you said something critical right there, Doug, that this is an opportunity for us to be that advisor. Like we can, if you think about an external consultant or you think about a Sherpa on the mountain, you assume that those people kind of deserve to be in those positions, right? They sort of embody that like advisory kind of energy. We have all that in us. And I think when we were talking about this earlier this week on our special Tuesday session of the Ethicsverse, where we're talking about board reporting. If we want to be viewed as a trusted advisor, well, then we must be an advisor. We have to come with a viewpoint. We have to come with a perspective around what's coming down the pike or what we as an organization should be doing. That's a conversation. That's a game of influence, but it's also rooted in having the right mindset to take advantage of these opportunities. Like the business needs you. The CEO is not an expert on compliance. They're not an expert on HR. They're not an expert on sustainability. It's your duty. It's your duty to I don't know, exert your influence on the business. That's why you have the title. That's why you have that job. And so I think if we don't have that right mindset, the impact, it's like if we don't have that right mindset, like our dimmer switch is like turned down. Like we have a bright light to shine in our organization, regardless of which aspect of compliance or HR or legal or what corner of the sort of guardian room we live in. But it's our duty to like exert that and make sure that we're leaving the business better, as Wendy says.
Nick, that really prompted another thought. I'm glad you brought that up. The compliance. The funny thing about sustainability reporting, it should be at the tail end of compliance, but it's kind of driving. It's like topsy-turvy. And I think one of the reasons people get stuck on sustainability reporting and compliance is they don't really know what's required. Well, it's inherent in much of the sustainability topics that it's kind of gray. It's kind of fuzzy. It's not a prescriptive list, report your revenues on this line according to these rules. It could be, what are your practices and your risk management approach on due diligence and reducing the risk of human trafficking in the supply chain? Andrew may tell you about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, that if you don't have it right, your goods are going to be stopped at the border. But what does that look like? I think compliance, a lot of times compliance requirements are not highly prescriptive. You don't get a cookbook. You're instructed to make dinner. So how do you navigate the gray? And in the early days of Sarbanes-Oxley, when nobody knew how to do that, I was telling clients, look, start out with the guidelines, look at what you're doing, match up the two, develop your internal controls, design them and implement them, document your intentionality, do what you say you were going to do, and then document it that you did it to that. That's compliance has muscle memory on that. And
Right.
just by
Great point.
instilling the confidence and getting people to say, and when I support a lot of companies in calculating greenhouse gas emissions inventories, one of the first things I say to them is, whatever number you publish, it's going to be wrong. It's going to be wrong because the data is not there. You're going to have to do estimates. You're going to have to leverage experience with your own operations. Just document, just do it in good faith to align with the requirements, document your procedures, follow the procedures, and this is going to emerge over time. Financial reporting evolved over years. Sustainability reporting is new. So I think compliance function is comfortable working in that world because we do all the time. The folks who are on the we know controls side of the fence expect everything to be rigorous and pat. The folks on the side of the fence who generate all the data are less comfortable with that. That's where compliance can be a perfect bridge between the two. And there's your business case for the person who said, gee, we can't get leadership to get us be involved. There's your ticket. That should open the door.
Yeah, and that's not like a new thing that the number's never going to be totally right. Like there's this illusion on the financial reporting side of the house, because I think it's an interesting, comparison point that like, oh, these are all numbers and these are all dialed in. And of course you can pass an audit, but there's a ton of assumptions that go in to many of those items on the financial statements. And that's fine. That's, those are articulated in GAAP. They need to be applied consistently. They need to be applied in a conservative way. GAAP is the generally accepted accounting principles, but that gray that we need to exist in and the inability to tie something down to an exact penny should not like prevent us from stepping into this thing and adding value and using it as, a currency or as a way to denominate progress. Because as you said, it's something that's done over time, which again reinforces the importance of a consistent application, a consistent, reasonable application of whatever those assumptions are. We write those assumptions out. We maintain a consistent application over time, and you can start to see those numbers move as proof of effective, application of efforts with regard to a particular goal.
And I think something else, Nick, that compliance brings to the table, you mentioned Workiva and the things that Ethico does. When the landscape is kind of gray, if you're left to navigate the landscape on your own, you know how to chart a course like that, and you know how to develop a workflow. And when you improve the workflow, like you start doing corrective actions and you see, gee, maybe we should change the processes up forward, the controls, so we don't have the same kind of findings again and again and again. Compliance knows how to revise a workflow. If you know the workflow, you can go change the workflow,
right? And
then you can monitor the effective of that. And this is everything from human capital to water use and to end of life product recycle recovery, right to repair, and it's everything. What is it that compliance can't do? It's a short list,
right? Well, and that's why I think this industry is so exciting, because to be great, you got to be able to paint with all those colors. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right. And, we heard, I was really kind of surprised but delighted at Compliance Week that the mood was still very upbeat. And what we heard from Mr. Palit was very inspirational, that we just, ethics doesn't go out the door, and our commitment doesn't go out the door with any external force or some of the things we're seeing today. And there's a slide in here on what's changed and what hasn't changed. DE&I is gone. things that you can't say, the extent of emphasis on sustainability topics. Well, companies still need to attract and retain talent. And, the original intent, I think, of some of these programs, maybe the messaging wasn't great, but the underlying need is still there.
But I mean, look, just to carry that forward, just because ESG, whatever, is not like in as many headlines as it was 2 years ago, doesn't mean like, okay, boys, let's start dumping the chemicals in the river, right? Like just because DEI isn't in vogue doesn't mean that like the laws around discrimination of protected classes have been deleted. So like, regardless, and I was talking to somebody at Compliance Week, or a couple folks at Compliance Week that were former DOJ, and they were so puzzled by this kind of meme that's going through our industry, the pearl clutching that, compliance is going to go away. There's no room for that. There's no room for that at all. These laws still exist. If you want to zoom into the FCPA thing, which has been like a big point of conversation, the statute of limitations exceeds beyond the current presidential term, and also a bunch of new power has been pushed down to the states. So now there's a bunch of attorneys general and prosecutors who now have an ability to go after this stuff that, we just need to zoom out of it, because like, this is not the time for like panic. This is the time for us to, put our shoulders back, our chest out, and really push for that impact, because our impact is always going to be a function of what our mindset is. And so I was really encouraged, to your point, on, the vibe at Compliance Week, because that's a little picture of our entire industry. And I don't think now is a time for fear. Now is a time for boldness to put these gifts and these skills that we've been building to work. Like, now is the most important time to do it, I'd say.
I'll share a tip. Exactly, Nick. I appreciate that. And I'll share a tidbit I picked up on a webinar from a Big Four firm. Being an alum, I get a lot of invites. And yesterday, there's climate and everything else. One of the discussions on climate, well, the SEC rule is out. We can put pencils down, yippee. Well, there's still rules and regulations and voluntary frameworks everywhere else. And one of the things that industry leader, the practice leader, said is, well, it's about risk. Why would you not want to know the risk? And why would you not? I mean, there are other disclosures on global accounting rules, and scope 3 is things that arise in the value chain. Well, whoever you are, if you sell a product or service to anybody else, which is kind of everybody, you're in somebody else's scope 3. So you might not get an ask from the SEC, but you're going to get an ask from every customer. So you've got to go ahead and do that. There's some other voluntary things there that are being imposed by the value chain. So climate is in and climate is out. And one of the points the practice leader made was that if you look at what SEC, I think, nicely calls extreme weather events, extreme weather occurrences and other natural events like wildfires, extended drought, frequency of hurricanes, where a resort company has properties and they get flattened and you can't go back. In Florida and along the East Coast, there's saltwater intrusion to a lot of the aquifers. So underground piping at factories is corroding faster, and something you thought you could use, let's say in Houston, for 40 years, maybe you can only use it 20 years. So that affects how you plan for capital, and the auditors are starting to look at that and say, maybe there's some line items on our balance sheet we need to change because they're being influenced by climate. So there's one example of all the sustainability issues, climate in particular, can change the financials. So it takes kind of a couple of steps to look at that big picture to say, what's the science, what's the occurrence? The rule or the frameworks are giving you hints at what you should look at. So whether you have to publish it to the SEC or not, you ought to understand those things to manage the risk. And by the way, there are opportunities for products and services. Let's go not just in the disclosures, but maybe you can come up with a coding for that pipe. Maybe you can come up with a financial service offering. Maybe you can come up with something in the healthcare system that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, that saves money, that recycles products, and helps you steal market share. Maybe you can use that angle to actually make money. Now, who has the viewpoint to see across that entire
Exactly.
spectrum of the industry? I think we have a few of them on this call.
That's right. If you find that you struggle with this binary thinking, the binary, binary thinking around risk, or you struggle with this like gray thing that we really need to get comfortable with, I think, to be most effective. There's a really great book called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And in that book, it makes the point that life is a lot more, and I think this is particularly true for ethics and compliance, and particularly true for these guardian functions that so many of us, have found ourselves in. A lot of people talk about playing chess. Well, in chess, there's no hidden information. You see all the information on the board. And in chess, there's almost invariably a very clearly defined, like, next best move. Okay. You might not make that best move, but that move exists in the context of the pieces that are on the board, and all that information for the game is out there for everyone to see. Our game is not like chess. It's a lot more like poker, where it's not really clear what the best move is. And you can, if a risk exists, well, now the next question is like, okay, well, how much risk exposure am I comfortable with, right? That's kind of akin to like how many chips I'm pushing in to see that next card turn over. So I'd really recommend that book. It really helped me break out of some binary thinking that I had kind of let creep into my mind, and see kind of this game a lot more like a poker game, a game of Texas Hold'em than, a chess match.
Nick, you bring up something that I heard in my session at Compliance Week, and I heard it in other sessions as well, that for some of these new areas, and sustainability isn't exactly new, but it's new to a lot of people. And with the high profile of reporting and some of the pull from the EU and the different toppings coming in, there are different aspects of it that are new to everybody. What I heard a lot is like, well, I'm afraid to go to these team meetings or get invited. If I come in and say I'm interested in sustainability, I'm like wearing my imposter syndrome. Like, how do I do that? Like, why should I be there? And my response to that was, you know what? We're all imposters. Everybody there is an imposter. You don't know any more, any less than people there. And I think, I found a helpful way to ask the question is to say, help me understand what our objective is here. Help me understand why we picked this particular platform. Help me understand why we elected to disclose on this topic and not the other topic. Because those are fair questions. The users of this information internally and externally will need to understand that as well. And if whoever's in charge of it can't explain that to you, there's an opportunity. You need to jump in and organize and document at the point where it can be explained. You are if you know not much, you're the perfect proxy for much of the audience your company is trying to reach. And the right questions to ask. And when you hear stuff that doesn't make sense, compliance people are trained. You have the muscle memory to sort through that and say, here's what doesn't make sense. Here's what needs a better process. Here's where we make improvements. This. The people you're talking to don't know this. You're going to add value just by being there.
So I love that you brought up this imposter syndrome thing. I want to tell a quick story. I was at a CEO conference many years ago, and this CEO of a highly successful organization grew it from nothing to billions of dollars, was up there talking, and I went up to him afterwards, and I was just, telling him how much I enjoyed the conversation. And in it, I was just like, man, I really want to be like you, when I grow up, like you know what you're doing. And he kind of laughed, and he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just figuring it out as I go. And that was such an empowering comment to hear, because nobody knows what they're doing. Like, it's all new. We're all we're all being adults for the first time, right? So we're all figuring it out as we go. And so Imposter syndrome is not proof that you don't deserve to be there. Imposter syndrome is merely proof that you're a human being whose pulse is still going. That's all that it is. So like when we can reframe that negative self-talk, it can give us the confidence to ask those questions that you just talked about, Doug, because anybody who's a rocket scientist, they weren't born a rocket scientist. They just learned a bunch of stuff in that particular field. And we're smart people.
That's right.
We have a whole life of successes. We're all still standing. And so that in itself should be enough proof to ask those questions and get educated on something. Just because you don't know something doesn't mean you're an idiot. You know what I'm saying? We're all smart people. We all can figure things out. And to your point, we have a unique skill set where we're able to navigate through different departments and different industries and different risks and, meet these regulatory obligations on different parts of the business. That's a very tremendous skill set that is readily applicable in all kinds of risk mitigation in all kinds of circumstances. So I think if we can stand on that and like turn the volume down on that negative self-talk, it really helps us unleash this potential that we have. I love that you brought that up.
And a couple things to work through that, Nick. I see we're getting close to time, and I'll hope we'll get some more questions. I'm a fan of pilot efforts, and I'm a huge fan of quick wins. That when you're wading into something for a new involvement, and even if there's a well-established team, excuse me, there will be topics that will come up, or divisions that will come up, or the company makes an acquisition. Something's going to happen that's going to be different, and it always kind of seems overwhelming. And people are busy. I like starting small. Do a little pilot exercise. How are we going to collect this data? How are we going to come up with a governance structure? When we're analyzing risk, like what do we consider with the risk? Start with a couple of things and start small and work your way through something and get a quick win. And helping some clients write procedures manuals. We had 60 different topics had to be written, and they ranged from almost the borderline trivial to the very complicated. And I said, well, you have really kind of a mama bear, papa bear, baby bear kind of thing here. And everybody looks at the papa bear procedures because they're so convoluted. They're well, let's start with the baby bear. Let's come up with the structure of a procedure. Let's come up with the structure of a control so people get familiar with the look and feel of how we do this and get people on board with this is what our control looks like. Then we can scale that up for the things that are maybe more difficult, more involved, and you're not trying to fight 10 battles at once. You know the structure, you know how it's going to roll, you know what our approval process is. We just apply it to something a little more complicated. So and everybody is going to be somewhere along the learning curve. A lot of people are going to be early on this learning curve. So don't worry, you've got company. Just take those baby steps and learn from those successes and build on that.
Love it. There's a great comment here. Oh, I just lost it. I love all these comments, man. My gosh, I love reading the comments afterwards also. Mm-hmm. Here it is. Sometimes the more you care, the more imposter syndrome creeps up. And it's important to go back to saying that I care about doing such a good job that I feel that I'm not, quote, enough. And that itself shows that I am the person for the job. I love that. That's exactly right. That can be a confirmation, like Wendy just said in the chat, that we are pushing our limits. And that can be a confirmation that we care. And somebody who cares needs to be in this job. If we don't care about our business, if we don't care about the stakeholders in it, the people in it, if we don't care about having an actual culture of integrity, then guess what? We're going to kind of fall into the status quo. We're just going to be kind of punching the clock, and we're not going to be moving anything forward. That's how, that is like so boring,
And what that comment, Nick, and what you just said is kind of a meta example of how you opened this session. In terms of if you did something and it made the difference, you said at the top of this session, you're focused on outcome. You can measure, I don't know what I contributed. Well, if you think about it and ask around, you contributed something, and chances are you made a difference. And
right.
If you look at the outcome of your effort, your initiative, your connections, your brain power, your commitment, that's a positive outcome. That's what all of this non-financial stuff is about. If you have better practices to remove forced labor from your supply chain, gee, did I make a difference? Well, the outcome is we're paying a fair wage for anything that we're importing to the country, and people are not chained to a desk in, East Asian country. That's a
Right.
very positive outcome. So it's, do you put a dollar and cents on that and say, what's the difference that I make? Well, you made a difference in the outcome. That's huge.
Right. That's a great point. All right, so we got a couple of minutes left. Let's pick your. We got a handful of slides left, so let's jump to the ones that are going to be most impactful as we wrap up.
Okay. Somebody had asked before about HR and what should HR do for this. I know this is a good one to go back to. One of the things where I think HR is probably underutilized here is that people do get involved in sustainability or reporting or cross-functional teams. One of the things that comes down from the top is, who's involved and who's on what committee. One of the things that I see that's kind of unfortunate is that oftentimes this is an extra part of somebody's job, and it's a volunteer effort, and it's the 20% of their job that's between 120 and 140% of the job, so you kind of never really get to it. Sustainability and reporting and is risk management, and it should be documented as some part of somebody's job description. They should have the ability to take training, go to conferences. It should be part of their review process and compensation structure. We're seeing more and more that's non-financial performance as part of executive compensation. So if you're part of the bedrock in the company that enables the higher ups to get their compensation for this performance, well, then you should get compensation for this performance too. And I think HR has a bigger role to play there than they really know, and that would help everybody along the way. A couple things, we're probably a U.S. The climate disclosure laws are still standing in California. I had one person say to me, well, gee, California really didn't do us any favors, did they? Well, they did, actually.
They did, yeah. They gave you a little picture of what's coming. That's all that is.
And it's typical of California to come up with our own way of doing things. I'm talking to you today from Los Angeles, but in this instance, they followed pretty closely a globally accepted framework. If you follow the global frameworks, there's a global accounting rule. If you're doing that, you can fulfill the requirements in California. So we didn't add anything new. One thing that this person really did not like is that this requirement, if you do business in California, that threshold is low. The reporting requirement is for the consolidated company, the whole entity. Well, gee, why if we only have this little report, well, what that did was it made it consistent with the reporting you do for everywhere else. Can you imagine if you only report on what you do in California, and then Illinois says you only report on what you do in Illinois, and then Belgium says you only report on what you do? Now you have like 70 compliance requirements. We stuck with one. So it kind of goes back to the point, pay attention to what's happened globally. That ISSB rule is pretty much the same as the California law. If you had been following that for a couple of years, you'd read this California law and say, we're already doing it. No big deal.
Right. And, companies that were really serious about financial reporting weren't caught off guard when Sarbanes-Oxley came out. I mean, that's another great picture of exactly what you're talking about. Some people were in a panic when Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and others were like, what the heck, we're already doing this. This is not, yeah, sure, I'm happy to sign. CFOs are like, I'm happy to go ahead and sign those documents. So you got to get out ahead of this stuff. And as Jason said, we have to make it business relatable. The more we can connect to the strategy of the business or the objectives of the business and keep that as an undercurrent in all of our communication, it really makes it a lot easier to frame out how our efforts impact the broader organization and why it's a business enablement activity and not a business stopping activity.
So Nick, I guess I'd bookend and close my remarks with all this reporting. Sooner or later, it's going to get audited by somebody, either a third-party auditor or financial auditor or another auditor. And the way they go about doing audits is different from what you've seen in, let's say, an ISO audit or something else. It's just very different. This COSO document will help you. The limited assurance you'll hear people talk about is about the design of what you're doing. Reasonable assurance is, are you applying it the way you said, and are you getting the output? Is it generating the results you intended? It's another session, another day maybe, but people are looking at, well, what do I do? What do I have to prepare for? Well, a couple things I would suggest. Leverage what you know about internal controls and get the design right so that you can withstand any audit. If you're ready for an audit, you're ready for anything. Put your program in place so you can do it right once. And then even if you don't have to do the more detailed output on the reasonable insurance, wouldn't you like to know that the program you designed is giving you the output and the outcome as you intended it? So that maybe you work with internal audit, with what you know about processes and controls. There's another good reason for compliance to be involved and bake that in. Is what we're designing giving us what we want? It sounds like a very fundamental, basic question, but you'd be surprised at how many people just throw together a procedure and think they're done. What is it we were trying to do? Compliance can help there.
Compliance can help there. I love it. Let's get one more massive emoji explosion for the one and only Doug. Doug, phenomenal presentation. I hope you all can join us next Thursday. 9 CEUs for Ethicsverse members. It's free in case you haven't heard. We're going to be diving deep on return on integrity. You will leave this session, I guarantee you, feeling way more equipped to speak the language of business. The language of business is ROI. If we're not showing up like business people, we're not going to be, we're not going to have a seat at that table too long. But we're rarely invited to the grown folks table. At some point, we got to just have enough confidence to pull our own chair up. And I think when we do that, we're usually surprised that people are going to kind of scoot over and be like, oh yeah, I want this person here. So love you all. Another great session. Thank you so much, Doug. And we'll see you guys next time.
Okay, bye-bye.